The text message glowed like a neon sign of betrayal in the darkness. Your body today was incredible. Can't wait to use that thing in the car again. Jack Miller's massive hands trembled as he held his wife's phone, the silicone toy still warm from recent use lying in his other palm like evidence of a murder. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of trust, 8 years of believing he knew the woman who shared his bed, all shattered in 30 seconds of terrible discovery. The thick fog rolling across suburban Chicago seemed to muffle his ragged breathing as rage transformed him from gentle giant into something predatory and dangerous. This wasn't heartbreak. This was the birth of calculated vengeance. Jack Miller had always been the kind of man who fixed things with his hands rather than his words. At 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, he carried the scars of 20 years in construction work across his forearms like a roadmap of honest labor. But tonight, those same hands that built houses would tear down a life, brick by careful brick. He had come home early from the construction site, exhausted and covered in concrete dust, looking forward to a quiet evening with Emily. The plan was simple: move her pristine white sedan to make room for tomorrow's concrete mixer, grab a beer, maybe watch a movie on the couch like the comfortable married couple they pretended to be. Instead, he had stumbled into the discovery that would transform him from devoted husband into something altogether more dangerous. The smell of sawdust and concrete dust still clung to his work clothes as he approached Emily's sedan, gleaming white under the porch light like a beacon of suburban respectability. What he discovered inside would haunt him for the rest of his life, not because of the betrayal itself, but because of what it revealed about the woman he had loved enough to marry in front of God and 200 witnesses. Jack slid into the driver's seat, immediately assaulted by the cloying sweetness of Emily's perfume, mixed with something else, something that made his nostrils flare with instinctive unease. The car felt foreign, contaminated by an energy that spoke of secrets and lies and activities that had nothing to do with the woman who claimed to love him. The leather seats held the imprint of bodies that had writhed here in passion, but not his body, not his passion. As he reached for the insurance papers in the glove compartment, his calloused fingers brushed against something that made his blood freeze in his veins. The object that emerged from behind the registration documents was unmistakably intimate, unmistakably used, and unmistakably not something he had ever seen in his own bedroom. The silicone was still warm, still slick with evidence of recent use, and Jack's stomach lurched as the implications crashed over him like a freight train loaded with betrayal. But it was Emily's forgotten phone that delivered the killing blow. The notification that appeared on the lock screen might as well have been a death certificate for their marriage. Ryan Black. Your body today was incredible. Can't wait to use that thing in the car again. Jack read the message once, twice, 3 times, each reading driving the knife of betrayal deeper into his chest. His vision blurred, not with tears, but with a rage so pure it felt like staring directly into the sun. The gentle giant who coached Little League on weekends and always held doors open for strangers began to die in that moment, replaced by something carved from granite and tempered by fury. The phone revealed more horrors as Jack scrolled through the conversation history with shaking hands. Months of messages, photos that made his throat close with revulsion, detailed descriptions of activities that should have been sacred between husband and wife, but had been shared with a stranger. Emily had not just betrayed him, she had mocked him, laughed about his trusting nature, referred to him as the caveman who never suspects anything. Jack's fist connected with the side mirror in an explosion of glass and rage that sent crystalline fragments cascading across the leather interior. Blood welled up from his knuckles and dripped onto the seat, mixing with the lingering scent of deception and sex. The pain was distant, irrelevant, overwhelmed by the surge of adrenaline that was already calculating next moves, strategies, the complete and total destruction of everyone who had dared to make him a fool. In the broken mirror, Jack caught sight of his own reflection and barely recognized the man staring back at him. His steel gray eyes had gone cold as winter ice. His jaw was clenched so tight it could have cracked teeth, and there was something predatory in his expression that would have terrified Emily if she could have seen it. This was not the man who had promised to love her in sickness and health. This was something else entirely, something that understood that betrayal demanded payment in blood, in fire, in suffering that matched the crime. Jack extracted himself from the car with surgical precision, pocketing both the evidence of his wife's infidelity and the phone that had become a roadmap to her destruction. The fog swirled around him as he walked toward his house, each step deliberate and purposeful. The man who had left for work that morning was dead, killed by a text message and a silicon betrayal. What walked up those front steps was something altogether more dangerous, something that understood the difference between justice and revenge, and had chosen the latter without hesitation. The kitchen light flickered nervously as Jack stood before his spice cabinet like a medieval alchemist preparing a particularly creative torture. The fluorescent bulb cast harsh shadows that danced across his face, transforming his usually gentle features into something that belonged in a nightmare. Every surface in the room seemed to whisper accusations. The coffee maker where Emily had kissed him goodbye this morning while planning to meet her lover. The dining table where they had shared thousands of meals while she harbored her secret. The photograph on the windowsill of their last vacation together when she had been texting Ryan behind his back. Among the ordinary seasonings and cooking ingredients sat a small bottle that most people would never have cause to own. Pure capsaicin extract derived from Carolina Reaper peppers, the hottest substance known to culinary science. He had bought it 6 months ago on a dare from his construction crew, a testament to masculine stupidity that had sat unused while Emily was conducting her affair in hotel rooms paid for with money from their joint savings account. The irony was perfect. While he had been working overtime to save for their planned anniversary trip to Paris, she had been spending those same hours writhing beneath another man. Tonight, that innocuous little bottle would become an instrument of perfect justice. Jack pulled on latex gloves with the methodical care of a surgeon preparing for an operation that would save no lives but would certainly ruin several. His hands were steady now, the trembling rage replaced by something far more dangerous, cold, calculated precision. In his mind, he could see Emily's face when the fire hit her most sensitive places, could hear Ryan's screams echoing through the suburban night like a symphony of suffering, could taste the sweet satisfaction of betrayal answered with chemical warfare. The wedding photos on the refrigerator seemed to mock him as he worked, their smiling faces a cruel reminder of vows that had been broken before the honeymoon suite was even paid for. Jack had found evidence in Emily's phone that her affair had started barely 6 months after their wedding, which meant she had been lying to him for 7.5 years. 7.5 years of fake smiles and false declarations of love. 7.5 years of playing the devoted wife while spreading her legs for Ryan Black in the backseat of the car Jack had bought her for their second anniversary. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough that it took his breath away. Emily had not just cheated, she had created an entire alternate life filled with lies and deception and moments of intimacy that should have belonged to her husband. She had laughed about Jack's trusting nature in her messages to Ryan, had mocked his dedication to their marriage, had referred to him as the big dumb construction worker who never suspects anything. That phrase would be burned into his memory forever, fuel for the fire that was consuming his old identity and forging something new and infinitely more dangerous. The capsaicin extract was thick as honey and twice as deadly, potent enough to cause chemical burns that would heal in weeks but leave psychological scars that would last forever. Jack applied it with the precision of an artist creating his masterpiece, coating every ridge and surface of Emily's intimate toy with a substance that registered over 2 million on the Scoville scale. This was not mere hot sauce. This was liquid agony distilled into its purest form, a punishment designed by nature to inflict maximum suffering on any living tissue unfortunate enough to make contact. As he worked, Jack found himself humming their wedding song under his breath, the melody taking on a sinister quality in the fluorescent light. At Last, by Etta James. The song they had danced to at their reception, while 200 guests applauded what they thought was the beginning of a beautiful love story. The lyrics mocked him now. At last my love has come along. My lonely days are over. His lonely days were just beginning, but at least they would begin with the knowledge that betrayal had been answered with fire. He photographed every step of the process with Emily's own phone, building a digital monument to creative revenge that would serve as both evidence and trophy. The images showed his gloved hands applying the capsaicin with the same care a painter might use on the Sistine Chapel, transforming an instrument of pleasure into a weapon of exquisite torture. These photos would be his insurance policy and his validation, proof that justice could be administered with surgical precision when the legal system was too slow and too civilized to provide satisfaction. Jack was beyond caring about consequences now, beyond worrying about legality or morality or any of the social contracts that governed lesser men. He had entered a realm where only justice mattered, where betrayal demanded payment measured in screams and chemical burns, and the kind of humiliation that followed people for the rest of their lives. Emily and Ryan had chosen to play with fire in the most literal sense. Now they would learn exactly how much heat the human body could tolerate before it begged for mercy and found none. The toy was returned to its hiding place with the same care a demolitions expert might use when placing explosives. Jack disposed of the gloves, cleaned every surface, eliminated every trace of his presence, except for the invisible fire that now waited patiently in Emily's glove compartment. He returned to his house and settled into his favorite armchair in the dark living room, a hunter waiting for prey to spring his trap. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the minutes with maddening precision. 9:30 became 10 o'clock, which crawled toward 11. Jack sat motionless in the darkness, his breathing steady and controlled, his mind crystal clear with purpose. This was not rage anymore. This was something far more dangerous. This was calculated vengeance served at precisely the right temperature. Shortly after midnight, the sound of Emily's laughter drifted through the fog from the driveway, accompanied by a deeper voice that Jack now knew belonged to Ryan Black. They were not trying to be quiet. They were drunk on their own audacity, high on the thrill of deception. Jack listened to the rustle of clothing, the wet sounds of kissing, the creaking of car springs as they settled into their familiar routine of adultery. The silence that followed lasted exactly 63 seconds. Jack counted. Then the night exploded. The scream that shattered the suburban tranquility was not human in any recognizable sense. It was the sound of a creature caught in a trap, a primal howl of agony that seemed to shake the very foundations of the neighborhood. It was followed immediately by a second voice, deeper, equally tortured, as Ryan Black discovered that pleasure could transform into unimaginable pain in the span of a heartbeat. Jack rose from his chair with the unhurried grace of a man whose plan was unfolding exactly as intended. He walked to the front door and stepped onto his porch, presenting himself as the concerned neighbor investigating a disturbance. The scene before him was chaos, painted in the red and blue lights of approaching emergency vehicles. Ryan Black writhed on the asphalt of the driveway, clutching his groin and gasping like a fish pulled from water. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained, his carefully maintained executive appearance destroyed by pain that radiated through his body like wildfire. Beside the car, Emily sat doubled over on the passenger seat, her face flushed crimson as she frantically dabbed at herself with tissues that only spread the chemical fire across more sensitive areas. Jack approached with measured steps, his face a mask of concerned innocence that barely concealed the predator beneath. Other neighbors were emerging from their homes now, drawn by the inhuman sounds of suffering like moths to a flame of scandal. The Johnsons peered over their hedge, their teenage daughter recording everything on her phone with the casual cruelty of her generation. Mrs. Peterson clutched her robe tighter as she whispered urgently into her phone, probably calling her sister to share the gossip before the ambulance even arrived. The college kids from the corner house stood slack-jawed at the spectacle, their party forgotten in favor of real-life drama that would fuel their social media feeds for weeks. "Is everything all right out here?" Jack asked with the perfect tone of a helpful neighbor, though his eyes held depths of satisfaction that bordered on the spiritual. He surveyed the scene before him like a general admiring the aftermath of a perfectly executed battle plan. Ryan Black looked up from the pavement, his face contorted with pain and the dawning recognition of exactly who was responsible for his current predicament. The expensive suit that had made him feel invincible in corporate boardrooms was now wrinkled and stained with sweat and tears. his carefully maintained executive appearance destroyed by agony that radiated through his body like molten lava flowing through his veins. "You!" he gasped, struggling to focus through the chemical torture. "You did this! You psychotic piece of—" Jack reached down and grabbed Ryan by his Italian silk tie, hauling him to his feet with casual strength that made the executive look like a broken marionette. The metal of Emily's car hood dented under the impact as Jack slammed Ryan against it, holding him there with one massive hand while fishing through his jacket pockets with the practiced efficiency of a pickpocket. "Now that would be an interesting accusation to make," Jack said conversationally, his voice carrying clearly across the gathering crowd. He produced Ryan's wallet and examined its contents with theatrical interest, making sure every neighbor could see the family photo tucked behind the credit cards. Ryan Black, Executive Vice President at Morrison Dynamics, married to Sophia Black according to this family photo. Handsome family, Ryan. I wonder what Sophia would think about you writhing in my driveway at midnight, screaming about your privates burning. The first police cruiser was pulling up now, its spotlight sweeping across the scene like a theater light illuminating the final act of a particularly twisted play. Jack released Ryan, who immediately collapsed again, and pulled a manila envelope from his back pocket. Inside were printed emails, hotel receipts, credit card statements, and photographs that told the story of a months-long affair funded by embezzled money from the Black family's joint checking account. "Officers!" Jack called out as two policemen approached cautiously, their hands resting on their weapons as they tried to make sense of the chaos before them. "I think we have a domestic situation here that might interest the good people of our neighborhood." He scattered the documents across Ryan's prone form like a dealer shuffling cards, each paper a nail in the coffin of respectability that both Ryan and Emily had spent years building. Hotel receipts from the Marriott downtown, charged to Ryan's corporate expense account for client meetings that had lasted well into the night. Email exchanges discussing meeting times and explicit activities that made even the hardened police officers exchange uncomfortable glances. Bank statements showing expensive gifts purchased with family money for someone who was definitely not Mrs. Sophia Black. The crowd of neighbors pressed closer now, their initial shock giving way to the kind of morbid fascination that turns decent people into vultures. Cell phones captured every moment, turning Ryan's humiliation into the kind of viral content that would follow him for the rest of his life. Mrs. Patterson's sister would have this story before the ambulance reached the hospital, and by morning it would be spreading through social media like wildfire. Ryan struggled to his feet, his face now purple with rage and humiliation as much as with capsaicin burn. The pain had receded enough for him to function, but the realization of what this meant for his career, his marriage, and his reputation was just beginning to sink in. He was a man who had built his identity on control and success, and now he was writhing on the pavement in front of his lover's husband while neighbors filmed his destruction. "You have no idea what you've done," Ryan snarled, spittle flying from his lips as he tried to maintain some shred of dignity. "I have lawyers, I have connections, I have enough money to bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again." Jack smiled, the expression so cold and predatory that several neighbors actually stepped backward. "You had all those things about 10 minutes ago," he replied pleasantly. "Let's see how many of them you still have tomorrow morning when your wife's divorce attorney gets copies of these photos and your company's board of directors sees exactly what you've been charging to your expense account." The truth of this hit Ryan like a physical blow. His face went white beneath the flush of chemical burns as he realized that Jack had not just caught him in an affair. He had systematically documented everything with the thoroughness of a detective building a case. Every hotel room, every dinner, every gift had been recorded and would now be used as evidence against him in divorce court and possibly criminal proceedings for embezzlement. Emily finally managed to extract herself from the car, moving like an old woman despite being only 38 years old. The chemical effects had largely subsided, leaving her with nothing but the burning shame of public exposure and the dawning realization that her carefully constructed double life had collapsed in spectacular fashion. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark rivulets, mixing with sweat and tears to create a raccoon mask of ruined makeup that made her look like a caricature of feminine desperation. "Jack, please," she began, her voice hoarse from screaming and thick with the kind of panic that comes when a person realizes they have lost everything and have no one to blame but themselves. "We can talk about this privately. We can work it out. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can—" "The only mistake here," Jack interrupted, his voice cutting through her desperate babbling like a knife through tissue paper, "was thinking I was stupid enough not to find out. Though I have to give you credit for creativity. Using our anniversary savings to pay for hotel rooms was a particularly nice touch. Very romantic." The police were finally close enough to intervene, though they seemed uncertain about exactly what crime they were witnessing. This was not covered in the Academy training manual. A cuckolded husband, chemical weapons disguised as marital aids, and enough evidence of adultery to fill a filing cabinet. The senior officer, a man who had seen everything in his 20-year career, looked at the scattered documents and then at Jack with something approaching professional respect. "Sir," he said carefully, "I think everyone needs to calm down and we'll sort this out at the station." "Actually," Jack replied, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who had just won a war, "I think I'll be staying right here. This is my house, my property, and my driveway. Mr. Black and my wife are the ones who chose to conduct their business here, and they're the ones who suffered the consequences of that choice. I didn't force them to use that device. I didn't force them to commit adultery, and I certainly didn't force them to do it where God and the neighbors could see." Emily's eyes widened as the implications of Jack's words sank into her chemical-burned brain. She was, technically speaking, guilty of trespassing, adultery, and public indecency. Ryan was guilty of the same charges, plus possible breaking and entering, depending on how the district attorney chose to interpret his presence on Jack's property. The chemical burns they had suffered could be seen as natural consequences of their own actions rather than assault, especially if Jack's lawyer argued that the capsaicin was applied to his own property as a security measure. "You can't do this to us," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible above the noise of departing emergency vehicles and the excited chatter of neighbors who were already crafting the story they would tell for years to come. "I'm your wife." "Were," Jack corrected with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You were my wife. Past tense. Right now you're a trespasser on my property who was caught in the act of adultery with chemical burns in places that suggest you were engaged in activities that would make a sailor blush." The crowd began to disperse as the main excitement wound down, but they moved slowly, reluctant to miss any final moments of drama. Jack remained in his driveway, watching the police finish their paperwork and listening to Emily's increasingly desperate attempts to convince someone, anyone, that she was the victim in this situation. But victims don't sneak around behind their husbands' backs for months on end. Victims don't use family money to fund affairs with married executives. Victims don't bring their lovers to their marital homes and conduct intimate activities in the driveway where children might see. Emily was many things: an adulteress, a liar, a woman who had betrayed the most sacred trust possible between two people. But a victim was not one of them. As the last police car pulled away, she found herself alone with Jack for the first time since the evening's festivities had begun, and the reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. "Jack," she began, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she had always used when she wanted something expensive or when she had been caught in a smaller lie. "We can fix this. People make mistakes. It happens all the time. We can go to counseling. We can work through this together. We can start over. Maybe take that trip to Paris we always talked about." Jack looked at her with the same expression he might give to a piece of defective equipment that needed to be discarded and replaced. The woman standing before him bore little resemblance to the Emily he had married 8 years ago in a church filled with friends and family who had believed they were witnessing the beginning of a love story. That Emily had been beautiful and kind and full of dreams for their future together. This Emily was a stranger wearing his wife's face, someone who had been corrupted by lies and greed and the thrill of deception. "Our marriage ended the first time you touched him," Jack said simply, his words carrying the weight of absolute finality. "Everything that happened tonight was just the funeral service." Emily's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely, like a dam bursting under pressure that had been building for hours. She lunged at him with fingernails extended like claws, screaming accusations and threats that made no logical sense, but expressed the full depth of her rage at being caught and humiliated. Jack caught her wrists easily, his construction-hardened hands encircling her delicate bones like iron shackles, holding her at arm's length while she thrashed and spat like a feral animal caught in a trap. "I loved you," she screamed, tears and mucus mixing on her face to create a mask of utter desperation. "I gave you 8 years of my life, 8 years of pretending to be happy in this boring suburban prison, and you throw it all away because of one little mistake? One moment of weakness? One mistake that lasted 6 months and cost us $12,000. Jack replied with the patience of a man explaining simple mathematics to a child. "One mistake that involved you bringing your lover to our home, using our bed, and spending our anniversary money on hotel rooms. That's not a mistake, Emily. That's a lifestyle choice. That's a deliberate decision to betray everything we promised each other on our wedding day." He released her wrists and stepped backward, putting distance between them as she collapsed onto the asphalt in a sobbing heap that reminded him of a broken doll discarded by a careless child. The neighbors who hadn't quite made it inside yet turned to watch this final act of the evening's drama, though most had the decency to pretend they weren't staring while simultaneously recording everything on their phones. "Pack your things and get out," Jack said, his voice carrying clearly across the driveway and into the ears of everyone within a block radius. "You have until tomorrow morning to take whatever you can carry. Everything else stays here where it belongs." Emily looked up at him from the pavement, her face streaked with mascara and disbelief, and the kind of despair that comes when a person realizes they have gambled everything and lost. "You can't kick me out of my own house," she said, though even she seemed to realize how pathetic the protest sounded. "Check the deed," Jack replied with the cruel precision of a surgeon making an incision. "This house is in my name, bought with money I earned before we got married. Your name is on the mortgage as a courtesy, not as an owner. Legally speaking, you're a guest here, and your invitation has been permanently revoked." This was not entirely true, but Emily's grasp of property law had never been particularly strong, and Jack was betting that her current emotional state would prevent her from thinking clearly about her legal rights. By the time she recovered enough to consult with an attorney, he would have had time to speak with his own lawyer and prepare for the inevitable divorce proceedings that would determine exactly how much of their shared life she would be allowed to take with her into exile. Emily struggled to her feet, her designer dress torn and stained beyond repair. "I'll take you for everything you have," she threatened. "I'll get half of everything, maybe more. You'll be sorry you ever crossed me." Jack smiled, an expression so cold and predatory that Emily actually stepped backward. "You're welcome to try," he said, "but I think you'll find that adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state, and judges tend to take a dim view of spouses who use marital assets to fund affairs, especially when those affairs are documented in such excruciating detail." He gestured toward his phone, where video of the evening's events was safely stored in the cloud. "I have everything, Emily. Every text message Ryan sent you, every hotel receipt, every credit card charge, every lie you told me about working late or visiting your sister. I have months of evidence showing exactly what you've been doing and exactly what it cost our marriage. When we get to court, you won't be getting half of anything. You'll be lucky to leave with the clothes on your back." The truth of this finally seemed to penetrate Emily's defensive anger like a knife sliding between ribs to pierce her heart. Her shoulders sagged as she realized that her affair had been far less secret than she had believed, that Jack had been building a case against her while she thought she was being clever. The power dynamic between them had shifted completely in a single evening, and she was no longer in control of any part of her life. Everything she had taken for granted, her home, her marriage, her financial security, her reputation in the community, had been stripped away as efficiently as someone removing a Band-Aid from a wound. "I'll go to a hotel tonight," she said quietly, her voice drained of fight and reduced to the hollow whisper of a woman who had just watched her entire world burn down around her ears. "But this isn't over, Jack. I'll find a way to make you pay for humiliating me like this. I'll find a way to hurt you the way you've hurt me." "You humiliated yourself," Jack replied with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "I just provided the lighting and made sure everyone could See clearly. You want to know what real humiliation feels like? Tomorrow morning when you wake up in that hotel room, check social media, check the local news websites, check your email and see how many of your friends have already seen the videos of tonight. This isn't just the end of our marriage, Emily. This is the end of your life as you knew it. The weight of these words settled over Emily like a suffocating blanket as she realized that her private shame was now public entertainment. By morning, everyone in their social circle would know exactly what she had done and exactly how it had ended. Her coworkers would whisper about her in the break room. Her book club would discuss her over wine and cheese. The other mothers at her gym would exchange knowing looks when she walked by. She had become the cautionary tale that other women would use to warn their daughters about the consequences of infidelity. Emily walked toward her car, moving like a woman twice her age despite being only 38 years old. Every step was a struggle against the weight of realization, the dawning understanding that she had traded 8 years of marriage and stability for 6 months of excitement that had cost her everything she had ever valued. She paused at the driver's door and looked back at Jack one final time, perhaps hoping to see some trace of the man who had once loved her enough to propose marriage on the shores of Lake Michigan while a string quartet played their song. What she saw instead was a stranger wearing her husband's face, someone who had been forged in the fires of betrayal and emerged as something altogether more dangerous than the gentle giant she had taken for granted. This was not a man who would forgive and forget after she completed a suitable period of groveling. This was not a man who would welcome her back with open arms after she had learned her lesson. This was a man who had been pushed past his breaking point and had discovered that he rather enjoyed the view from the other side. "Goodbye, Emily," Jack said, and there was a finality in those words that made her shiver despite the warm night air. It was not "see you later" or "we'll talk tomorrow" or any of the temporary farewells that suggested the possibility of reconciliation. It was goodbye in the truest sense of the word. The kind of ending that closed books and finished chapters and left no room for sequels. She drove away into the fog, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. The chemical burns between her legs had faded to a dull ache, but the pain in her chest was growing stronger with every mile she put between herself and the life she had destroyed. Behind her, the house where she had lived for 5 years grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely, taking with it everything she had thought she could count on forever. Jack remained alone in the driveway where his marriage had died in screams and chemical fire, breathing the night air that still carried the faint scent of capsaicin and betrayal. The house behind him was dark and quiet, waiting for him to come inside and begin the process of rebuilding his life from the ashes of someone else's lies. But he was not ready for that yet. He wanted to stand here a little longer, savoring the taste of justice served at exactly the right temperature, and contemplating the strange peace that came from finally understanding who he really was when pushed beyond all limits. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and divorce papers and the messy business of untangling 8 years of shared life that had been built on lies and maintained through willful blindness. Tomorrow there would be phone calls from relatives who had heard the news, explanations to employers who had seen the videos, and the inevitable discovery that everyone in their social circle had suspected the affair long before Jack had confirmed it. Tomorrow there would be the process of becoming a divorced man, of learning to sleep alone in a bed that had once held two people who promised to love each other until death did them part. But tonight, there was only the satisfaction of knowing that betrayal had been answered with fire, that lies had been burned away to reveal the truth underneath, and that sometimes the only justice available was the justice a man created for himself with his own 2 hands in a thorough understanding of chemical warfare. Tonight belonged to Jack Miller in the ghost of his marriage, dancing together in the driveway where it had all ended with the kind of poetic justice that would be remembered and retold for generations to come. Tomorrow there would be lawyers and divorce papers and the messy business of untangling 8 years of shared life. Tomorrow there would be phone calls and explanations and the inevitable discovery that everyone in their social circle had suspected the affair long before Jack had confirmed it. Tomorrow there would be the process of becoming a divorced man, of learning to sleep alone in a bed that had once held two people who promised to love each other until death did them part. But tonight, There was only the satisfaction of knowing that betrayal had been answered with fire, that lies had been burned away to reveal the truth underneath, and that sometimes the only justice available was the justice a man created for himself with his own two hands and a bottle of liquid vengeance. Jack Miller walked back toward his house, leaving the fog to settle over a driveway that had seen the end of one story and the beginning of something else entirely. Behind him, the street returned to its suburban quiet, but the silence now carried the weight of scandal that would ripple through the neighborhood for years to come. And somewhere in that silence, mixed with the scent of fog and fading capsaicin, was the ghost of a marriage that had died exactly as it had lived, loudly, messily, and with far more drama than anyone had bargained for. The front door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the final punctuation mark on the evening's events. Inside, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of deception had been physically lifted from its walls. Jack walked through rooms that were his alone now, past wedding photos that would be gone by morning, past reminders of a life that had been built on lies and maintained through willful blindness. In the kitchen, the bottle of capsaicin extract still sat on the counter where he had left it, a small monument to creative problem-solving and the therapeutic value of appropriate revenge. Jack picked it up and held it to the light, noting that he had barely used a quarter of the bottle's contents. There was enough left for several more applications, should the need arise, but he doubted it would. Word of tonight's events would spread through their social circle faster than wildfire, serving as a warning to anyone else who might be tempted to test Jack Miller's patience. He had drawn a line in the sand with capsaicin and broken bones, and that line would not be crossed again. Jack placed the bottle back in the spice cabinet, nestled between the oregano and the paprika like any other cooking ingredient. To someone who didn't know better, it would look perfectly innocent, but Jack would always know it was there, a reminder of the night he stopped being a victim and started being something else entirely. He turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs to a bedroom that would never again hold the scent of Emily's perfume or the sound of her breathing in the darkness. Tomorrow he would change the locks, cancel her credit cards, and begin the legal process of erasing her from his life as completely as she had erased their marriage vows from her conscience. But tonight he would sleep alone in a bed that felt like freedom, dreaming of fog and fire, and the perfect symmetry of justice served at exactly the right temperature. And if he happened to smile in his sleep, well, that was between him and the darkness that had swallowed his old life whole and given birth to something infinitely more dangerous. The house settled around him with the contented sigh of a building that had finally had its secrets exposed to the light. Outside, Chicago slept on, unaware that one of its suburbs had just witnessed the kind of domestic justice that would become legend in certain circles. And in a hotel room across town, two people discovered that betrayal carried a price that could be measured in Scoville units, and that some forms of heat lingered far longer than others. Morning would bring consequences and complications, lawyers and depositions, the tedious process of unmaking a life that had been years in the building. But tonight belonged to Jack Miller and the ghost of his marriage, dancing together in the kitchen where it had all begun with a bottle of liquid fire and a man who refused to be anyone's fool. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed once for the half hour, its voice echoing through rooms that had witnessed the birth of a scandal and the death of innocence. And somewhere in that echo was the promise of tomorrow, bright and clean and free from the shadows that had haunted this house for far too long. 3 days after the incident that would forever be remembered as the night of chemical justice by neighborhood gossips, Jack received a phone call that would transform his personal revenge into something far more systematic and devastating. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried the kind of cold authority that comes from years of destroying enemies in courtrooms across 3 states. "Mr. Miller, this is Sophia Black. I believe we have business to discuss." They met at an upscale coffee shop in downtown Chicago, where power brokers conducted their most sensitive negotiations over $12 lattes, and the ambient noise of clinking cups provided perfect cover for conversations that could end careers and destroy reputations. Sophia Black was a work of art in human form, tall, elegant, perfectly groomed, and radiating the kind of lethal intelligence that could dissect a man's life with surgical precision. She was beautiful in the way that expensive weapons are beautiful, flawless, deadly, and designed for maximum impact. "My husband is a pathetic fool," she said without preamble, her manicured fingers wrapped around a cup of black coffee that seemed to mirror her mood. "But he's a wealthy, pathetic fool, and I didn't spend 15 years building our empire just to watch him throw it away on a parade of desperate suburban housewives who mistake his money for genuine affection." She placed a leather portfolio on the table between them that was thick enough to contain the complete destruction of several lives. Jack could see that it held far more than just evidence of Ryan's affair with Emily. There were photographs of other women, dozens of them, spanning years of systematic infidelity. Hotel receipts dating back to their honeymoon. Credit card statements showing a pattern of deception that had begun almost immediately after their wedding. Ryan had not just cheated, he had turned adultery into an art form, with Emily being merely his latest masterpiece. "I've been documenting his activities for 3 years," Sophia continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone, despite the nuclear-level evidence she was displaying. "Private investigators, forensic accountants, digital surveillance specialists, hackers who could recover deleted files from phones he thought he had wiped clean. I know about every woman, every hotel room, every restaurant dinner charged to our joint accounts, every lie he told me about working late while he was actually working late on someone else's marriage." Jack studied the photographs spread before him like tarot cards predicting doom, each one representing another family destroyed by Ryan's inability to honor the most basic promise a man could make. "This must have cost a fortune." "Money well spent," Sophia replied with the satisfaction of a general reviewing battle plans that could not possibly fail. "What I didn't have was a public catalyst, something dramatic enough to justify the complete annihilation I had planned for him. Your wife's little performance in your driveway provided exactly what I needed. The chemical burns, the police involvement, the neighbor videos that went viral on social media. It's perfect. No one will question why I'm divorcing him now, and everyone will understand why I'm taking him for everything he's worth." She leaned forward slightly, and Jack caught a glimpse of the predator that lived behind her perfect makeup and designer clothing. This was a woman who had been sharpening knives in the darkness, while her husband thought she was arranging charity fundraisers and book club meetings. "I want him destroyed, Mr. Miller. Not just embarrassed, not just divorced, but completely and utterly obliterated. I want him to lose his job, his reputation, his social standing, his ability to ever show his face in polite society again. And I want your wife to watch every moment of it, to understand that her sordid little affair wasn't just a betrayal of your marriage. It was the final nail in the coffin of everything she thought she could count on." Jack found himself nodding in appreciation for the thoroughness of Sophia's planning. This was revenge elevated to the level of art, a systematic destruction that would leave no detail unaddressed and no loose ends to complicate the final result. "What do you need from me?" "Testimony, evidence, full cooperation with my legal team, and your presence at certain key moments when maximum humiliation is required," Sophia replied, already pulling contracts from her briefcase with the efficiency of a woman who had anticipated every possible outcome. "In return, I'll ensure that your divorce proceedings go so smoothly they'll feel like a vacation. Emily will be too busy dealing with the radioactive fallout from Ryan's complete destruction to mount any kind of defense against your claims. By the time I'm finished with them, they'll both be social pariahs that even their own families will disown." Over the next 2 hours, Jack learned the true scope of Ryan's betrayals and Sophia's plans for cosmic justice. It was breathtaking in its completeness, a legal and social annihilation so thorough that it would serve as a cautionary tale for future generations of would-be adulterers. Corporate lawyers were already being briefed about Ryan's systematic misuse of company resources. Divorce attorneys were preparing papers that would leave him homeless and penniless, and social media specialists were crafting a campaign of public shame that would ensure his humiliation reached every corner of their interconnected social universe. "There's one final detail," Sophia said as they prepared to leave, her hand resting on Jack's arm with the casual intimacy of co-conspirators. "Emily is currently staying at the Marriott downtown, room 412. the same room where she and my husband conducted many of their romantic encounters. She's been calling Ryan's cell phone every few minutes, but he's heavily sedated and under psychiatric observation. The poor delusional creature seems to think this is all just a temporary setback that can be fixed with enough tears and promises to change. She handed Jack a hotel key card with the ceremonial gravity of someone passing a sacred weapon to a worthy warrior. I thought you might want to deliver certain news personally. Consider it a graduation present from your old life to your new one. Jack pocketed the key card, already imagining Emily's face when she realized that her great love affair had been nothing more than a convenient lie told by a serial predator. Why are you doing this for me? Sophia's smile was beautiful in the way that winter storms are beautiful, awesome, destructive, and absolutely without mercy. Because shared vengeance is the most satisfying kind, Mr. Miller. And because watching people who thought they were smarter than everyone else discover exactly how stupid they actually were is one of life's purest pleasures. That evening, Jack stood outside room 412, listening to the pathetic sound of Emily's voice as she left her 15th unanswered voicemail for a man who would never speak to her again. Through the thin hotel door, he could hear her desperation growing with each ignored call, her voice breaking as she begged someone who no longer existed to rescue her from consequences she had richly earned. When he finally used the key card to enter the room, Emily's emotional journey across her face would have been entertaining if it hadn't been so completely predictable. Initial shock transformed into hope, which quickly curdled into terror as she recognized that Jack's presence here was not a sign of reconciliation, but a harbinger of something infinitely worse. "How did you get in here?" she whispered, clutching her phone like a talisman against forces she was only beginning to understand. "Courtesy of Mrs. Sophia Black," Jack replied, settling into the room's only chair as if he had been paying for it himself. "She thought you might appreciate learning that your romantic destiny was actually the culmination of a 3-year investigation into her husband's recreational adultery. You weren't his first affair, Emily. You weren't even his 10th. You were just the most convenient excuse for his wife to finally destroy him completely." Emily's face transformed through several shades of white as this information penetrated her fantasy-addled brain. "What are you talking about? Sophia doesn't know about us. Ryan said she was completely oblivious, that she never paid attention to anything he did." Jack's laughter filled the sterile hotel room like the sound of breaking glass. "Ryan lied to you, Emily. Just like you lied to me. Just like you've both been lying to yourselves about the consequences of your actions. Sophia has known about every affair he's had since their honeymoon, including yours. She has photographs, recordings, financial records, testimony from other wives he's destroyed. Tomorrow morning, she's going to use all of it to obliterate him so completely that he'll be lucky to find work-scrubbing toilets in bus stations."